Breaking right now on Morning News Now, a horrific scene out of India. A London-bound flight with more than 200 passengers on board crashes moments after takeoff. We will bring you the very latest. Also developing this morning, another night of protests and pushback in Los Angeles as federal immigration raids continue across the country. Overnight, police and protesters clashed during demonstrations in Seattle as the calls against deportations grow louder nationwide. Plus, a split verdict in the sexual assault retrial of disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein.
There's no win or lose for me. I was not the one who was on the trial. We have one life to live. And if we won't fight for our own justice, then who will?
Our exclusive interview with one of the accusers. And it's tea time for some of the world's best golfers. What to expect from this year's big U.S. Open.
Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to get right to this breaking news this morning out of India, where an Air India flight with 242 people on board, including the crew, of course, crashed just minutes after takeoff.
The Boeing 787 Dreamliner was headed to London when it went down in a residential area near the airport in Ahmedabad. Smoke could be seen pouring from the scene. Investigators are now searching for answers.
NBC News international correspondent Danielle Hamamdjian, she's following the developments from London. She joins us now. Danielle, good morning. What are authorities saying at this hour about how this crash happened? What do we know so far?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Here's what we know, that this plane, Air India AI 171, departed this morning with 242 people on board. Of those, 10 were cabin crew and 2 of them were pilots. This was meant to be a 10-hour flight to Gatwick Airport, and we have a statement from the airport here at Gatwick saying that it crashed upon departure and it was due to land here in London at 6:25 local time. According to the website Flight Radar, it went up to 625 feet in altitude, at which point it lost signal. According to air traffic control at Ahmedabad Airport, there was a mayday call. Now, this airport is the 7th busiest airport in India. It is 480 miles south of New Delhi. There is footage coming in, which NBC News is very busy now trying to verify. But you can see the plumes of smoke there. It crashed seconds after departure, so outside the perimeter of the airport, but in a civilian area. A senior police officer on the ground has briefed reporters in the past hours saying that the plane crashed on a doctor's hostel, a medical college. Still waiting for clarification as to who would have been inside that establishment. But we do have a statement from Air India, and I'm going to read it to you now. It says, "With profound sorrow, I can confirm that Air India Flight 171 operating Ahmedabad to London Gatwick was involved in a tragic accident today. Our thoughts and deepest condolences are with the families and loved ones of all those affected by this devastating event. At this moment, our primary focus is on supporting all those affected, all the affected people and their families." This is from the chairman of Air India. Guys.
Danielle, this is believed to be the first fatal crash involving a Boeing 787. Boeing has released a statement saying, "We are aware of initial reports and working to gather more information." Of course, Boeing has had a string of negative headlines over the past couple years. What are investigators likely going to be focusing on these next few hours?
Yeah, well, this is still a rescue operation, and I'm no aviation expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be one, but you can see we're not dealing with extreme weather here. The skies were clear, and the video coming in, we are working to verify the veracity of those videos, but experts will be looking to get a preliminary understanding of what just happened here. There is no word yet on the number of fatalities and injuries, but the most recent photograph that I've seen shows the tail of the plane somewhat still intact. It certainly gives you hope that there are survivors in this crash, but we are waiting to see and to hear from authorities. And I should tell you, we also have a breakdown of the nationalities of the people on board. As I mentioned, 242 people. Of those, 53 of them are UK nationals, 1 Canadian, 7 Portuguese. The rest were 169 of them Indian nationals. And according to Reuters, 217 of them adults, 11 children on board. Guys, back to you.
Danielle Amamjian covering this breaking story for us. Danielle, thank you so much.
Let's turn now to some domestic news. We have these ongoing protests against immigration raids in Los Angeles that have gone on for nearly a week and are now spreading to other cities.
A federal court hearing is set for today in San Francisco. At issue there, whether the Trump administration can use the National Guard or Marines to assist in these raids. Overnight, a curfew was in effect for a second night in L.A., an effort to try and ease the situation there. Protesters did take to the streets yesterday for a sixth day, sounding off against immigration raids that began last Friday. The Trump administration called in the National Guard and then later the Marines. L.A. Mayor Karen Bass once again reiterating her message that the federal law enforcement help is not warranted.
Hearing the administration wanted to go after violent felons, gang members, drug dealers. But when you raid Home Depots and workplaces, when you tear parents and children apart, and when you run armored caravans through our streets, you're not trying to keep anyone safe. You're trying to cause fear and panic.
Meanwhile, thousands of people across the country have joined demonstrations and rallies opposing the raids being conducted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
NBC News correspondent Camila Bernal joins us once again from Los Angeles with the very latest. Camila, good morning. So despite the heavy local police presence, the military, plus this curfew, people still taking to the streets of downtown L.A. Just what's the latest on the ground?
Hey guys, good morning. What we're seeing again is mostly peaceful protests throughout the day. And then at some point you do have a couple or a group of people that start throwing things at officers, that start creating chaos. And that's when you have these officers move in. The difference over the last couple of days is the strong and very big police presence. What they do is they come in large numbers. We've seen mounted police as well, and they disperse those crowds. Obviously, right now, we are still under that curfew. Things are calm in downtown LA right now. And Mayor Karen Bass saying that that curfew is actually working. She says it's working because what happens is that at some point they clear the streets, they arrest whoever doesn't listen or doesn't want to be essentially taken out of the streets. And then she says that they've been able to avoid a lot of the vandalism and a lot of the graffiti that they were having earlier in the week. And instead, they're arresting people for violating that curfew. So that's what the mayor says in terms of the curfew. We talked about yesterday how it's only in a small area of Los Angeles where this curfew is in effect. But what we are seeing is some of those protesters walking out of the curfew zone and protesting outside of that area. Then you have police officers moving in and dispersing those crowds as well, guys.
Camila, as we've mentioned, there's a court hearing scheduled for today on whether the Trump administration can use troops to assist with these raids. Tell us about this hearing and anything that we're hearing from the White House, the latest response.
Yeah, so Governor Gavin Newsom earlier this week had announced this lawsuit saying that they did not want the National Guard here in Los Angeles. You heard it from the mayor and you've heard it from the governor over and over again as they say they did not ask for the National Guard to be here, and they believe it is illegal to have them here because they did not request it. On the other hand, you have the White House, you have the president saying that he needed to act fast, he needed to bring in the National Guard, and they think that you do need the National Guard here in LA. Here's what the White House press secretary said.
It's very clear for the president what he supports and what he does not. Unfortunately for Democrats, that line has not been made clear, and they've allowed this unrest and this violence to continue, and the president has had to step in. The president, as I just answered, supports the right of Americans to peacefully protest. He supports the First Amendment, but that is not the majority of the behavior that we have seen taking place in Los Angeles.
And there's definitely somewhat of an escalation as a lot of people here in LA say they want to continue protesting for as long as the National Guard is here, guys.
Let's talk about what we are seeing in other cities now. Thousands of people across the U.S. are also protesting against immigration raids. What's happening? What's their message?
Yeah, what you're seeing here in LA is definitely inspiring a lot of people across the country to go out and do the same. You're seeing those protests here in California, but in San Francisco, you're also seeing it in Vegas, in New York, in Washington State, and in Texas. And you're also seeing some politicians, depending on where they land on what side of the political aisle they're at, you're seeing them sort of also mirror what's happening in LA. We've seen some curfews being put in place in some of these states. And then you're seeing, for example, Governor Greg Abbott saying he does want the National Guard to be out because of these protests. So again, depending on where you fall on this issue, you're seeing political leaders mirroring what's happening in LA or siding with the president and saying that you do need to have the National Guard to control a lot of these protesters, guys.
All right, Camila Bernal reporting from LA. Camila, thank you so much. Despite the protests, ICE is now preparing to send more tactical units to so-called blue cities, places led by Democratic leaders. That's according to sources familiar with the planning. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has those details.
A 7-year-old boy crying out to his father, who'd just been taken into custody by ICE agents at a car wash in Los Angeles. That man undocumented. Another one of his sons, who is a U.S. citizen, just turned 16.
Says it easy, brought a lot of joy to my house. And now I feel that without him, the house feels dead.
Also in California, this video shows ICE agents chasing down a farm worker. One woman recording on her cell phone when she's confronted by an immigration officer.
We're doing our job. You can do whatever you like, but please stand back.
In Omaha, the new Democratic mayor's office says ICE detained nearly 80 people at a meatpacking plant. The raid so sudden, workers' lunch boxes were left behind.
I don't know why Omaha was targeted.
There were 11 million illegal border crossings during the Biden administration. President Trump is ramping up his mass deportation plan.
Nobody can understand why they allowed people to come into our country totally unvetted, unchecked.
The Department of Homeland Security saying in L.A. this week, ICE agents arrested undocumented immigrants with convictions for murder, child molestation, domestic violence, and other serious felonies. A new poll finding a majority of Americans, 54%, approve of the president's deportation program. Now, two sources familiar with the planning of future ICE operations tell NBC News the agency is now preparing to deploy special response tactical teams to 5 cities run by Democrats: Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and the D.C. area.
These raids are not isolated incidents. They are direct assault in our immigrant families, on working-class neighborhoods.
Those sources say it's not clear if the raids in those cities will begin immediately, but the tactical units have been told to be ready to deploy. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, the White House.
Well, today, Democratic governors from 3 so-called sanctuary cities, New York, Illinois, and Minnesota, will testify before members of Congress. These are states that limit the amount of resources and local law enforcement that will aid federal immigration enforcement. The Republican chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Congressman James Comer, launched an investigation into these policies back in January.
The committee released a video on X ahead of today's hearing that highlights alleged crimes involving undocumented immigrants. The Post accuses sanctuary governors of, quote, shielding criminal illegal aliens, then pretending the consequences don't exist.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us now with more. Hey, Julie, good morning. So this is the second hearing in this investigation, and some big-name governors are going to testify, like we just mentioned. Got Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, Minnesota's Tim Walz. What can we expect out of this?
Well, good morning, guys. I read through some of their testimony. It was embargoed until early this morning. And in there, I couldn't find many references to sanctuary cities. This is a term, of course, that is not illegal to describe these cities and states, but it's one that Democrats do not like using because it implies that they are not cooperating, as you said, with federal law enforcement efforts when it comes to rounding up migrants, perhaps that were here illegally, perhaps that were here without documentation. And in these testimonies, all 3 of these governors defend their states, defend the policies, and all 3 of them actually blame the influx of migrants that happened over the last several years. You mentioned during the Biden administration that led them to this point of crisis. All of them say that they want to cooperate with the administration's efforts to try and protect and keep criminals off of the streets and protect citizens who live there. But of course, they all also back Governor Newsom in LA and what's happening in California. And so that's certainly going to be a flashpoint in this hearing today.
Julie, I want to turn to another story that we've been following this week on Capitol Hill. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been testifying about his department's budget for next year. Yesterday, he was grilled by Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. She pointed out while the Trump administration provided a specific part of the Constitution they're relying on as justification to send the National Guard to L.A., they did not provide the same details to support deploying the Marines. Let's play part of that.
What is the authority that the administration is using to deploy active duty Marines to California neighborhoods? What authority?
Senator, the president has constitutional authority in order to support.
Cite the provision of the Constitution.
I'd have to pull up the specific provision.
So, Julie, just following up on that, was Hegseth able to explain why the administration claims this is constitutional?
Well, Hegseth was pressed on this over and over again, not only by Senator Tammy Baldwin, but also in the other hearing that he had already this week today, of course, later being the third one. And Hegseth defended the administration, saying that it was lawlessness in the streets of L.A. that caused the administration to send the National Guard and send the Marines. He said, of course, like others in the administration, that Trump has every right to do so. The Defense Department, of course, taking the security of Americans seriously and defending federalizing the National Guard, which, of course, we've heard from Democrats significant pushback. And, of course, in a completely different issue during the hearing, he was also pressed on Ukraine and Russia and other matters that Republicans rarely disagree with the Republican administration on. Here's Mitch McConnell in a hearing pressing Hegseth just the other day.
Who's the aggressor and who's the victim in the conflict?
Russia's the aggressor.
Which side do you want to win?
As we've said time and time again, this president is committed to peace in that conflict. Ultimately, peace serves our national interests, and we think the interest of both parties, even if that outcome will not be preferable to many in this room and many in our country.
Of course, McConnell there, this is such a big issue for him, other Republicans as well, taking issue with some of the things that Hegseth has said about Ukraine, especially in the last couple of months. But Hegseth there in the clip that you didn't quite see, defending the administration and blaming both the Biden and Obama administrations for what they say perpetuated and led to Putin's escalation in Ukraine.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you very much.
Also this morning, we're learning new details about a tactic the Trump administration is using to try and speed up and arrest the arrest and deportation of undocumented immigrants.
A recent memo sent to immigration judges that was obtained exclusively by NBC News shows the administration is instructing judges to quickly dismiss migrants pending immigration cases. That then allows ICE agents to immediately move in and arrest them.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us with more on this. Monica, so how is this tactic the Trump administration pushing different from the way immigration cases have traditionally been handled? And question we ask with many of these things, do we know if it's legal?
Well, it really does shorten the time that immigrants would have to make their appeal in a particular case. And that follows in line with the directives from the Trump administration right now to try to deport as many people as possible. That's something that there are quotas they're trying to reach. And so in this new memo to immigration judges, that is what they are asking. And many people might wonder, well, isn't that something where the judges are supposed to be independent? But they're actually a part of the executive branch. So that is why they can ask them to make these adjustments. And according to sources who are close to the union who represents the immigration judges, this is actually legal, even though it is certainly controversial because, again, it removes some of the timing here where people can respond, and it speeds up the ability for an immigration judge to basically make a ruling from the bench and then expedite that person's situation to then possibly be deported much faster than before.
Monica, the deadline for President Trump's sweeping global tariffs to take effect is fast approaching on July 8th. We did also want to cover this with you this morning. We know the president said yesterday that a deal with China was effectively done, although he and President Xi Jinping do still need to sign off on it. What do we know here? What is the latest here, and any trade negotiations also with other countries?
Look, there's been a little bit of mixed messaging here because while they're talking about this deadline, the president's own Treasury Secretary told lawmakers just earlier this week that likely that deadline could slide. Even the president, when pressed last night, said it's possible he could extend the current pause. Remember, this deals with the tariffs that were announced back in April, and then the president said, OK, I'm going to give countries some time to try to negotiate trade deals. So there are at least 18 major trading partners with the United States that still could do that. But so far, since April, there's only been one deal with the UK that has come to fruition. So the time really is running short. But this is a situation where most likely this could be adjusted, or, as the president said, perhaps he will send some of these countries what he calls take it or leave it deals in the next couple of weeks right before that deadline approaches.
All right, Monica Alba. Monica, thank you so much. Here in New York, deliberations are set to continue on one remaining charge in the sexual assault trial against Harvey Weinstein. Only one charge remains after the jury delivered a mixed verdict yesterday, reaching decisions on 2 of the 3 counts against him. He was found guilty of sexually assaulting one woman and not guilty of assaulting another. But jurors were deadlocked on the final charge of third-degree rape. NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas spoke exclusively with one of the women at the center of this case.
After 5 days of heated deliberations, including jurors say arguments and threats, they reached a partial verdict, finding Weinstein guilty on one count of a criminal sexual act and not guilty on another. They remain divided on the last charge, third-degree rape. That not guilty verdict concerns an allegation from Kaya Sokola, a former model who said Weinstein forced oral sex on her in 2006.
There's no win or lose for me. I was not the one who was on the trial. We have one life to live. And if we won't fight for our own justice, then who will?
Sokola, one of 3 accusers to testify during this latest trial. His 2020 trial, which resulted in a conviction for rape and sexual assault, was overturned by New York's highest court last year.
Harvey Weinstein has maintained all along that all of these relationships with all of the women were consensual. What message do you have for him today?
The same message that I had to his lawyer, that they should be ashamed of themselves.
Sokola's attorney saying despite the verdict, her testimony was crucial.
I don't know that it would have resulted in this conviction if Kaya didn't testify. And so it's a victory no matter what.
Last week, Weinstein speaking out in a phone interview.
I acted immorally by actions that were stupid, but never illegal, never criminal.
Sokola says she's relieved this chapter is now closed.
When you look back at this trial, it doesn't sound like you regret taking part in it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know, I did it not to prove Harvey guilty, because I don't have anything to prove to anyone. Nothing will change that.
Kaya told me that she really is just focused on being a mother to her young son, to focus on healing. That, this has been a really traumatic experience for her, but that at the same time, she's grateful that this chapter has closed and that now she can focus on getting back to her true love of Hollywood, her production company, focusing on those projects and a lot more to come, she says.
All right, Chloe, thank you.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, good morning to you. Thanks for being here. So the jury foreman actually told the judge that he was threatened during deliberations. Obviously, they had this hard time reaching this verdict, this split decision. How often do things get heated like that in a jury? And also, does this indicate what we think may happen on that last charge?
Yeah, you'd be amazed how much jury hijinks factor into a judge having to manage a trial. But I have to tell you, at least in my experience, it's the other end of the spectrum we have to contend with. Jury apathy, jurors falling asleep during boring testimony. It's a little more rare for me to see jurors, well, they may argue during deliberations, but actually physically threatening each other, allegedly, is something that is pretty rare. It doesn't happen that often, but this is a high-stakes, high-profile case, so no surprises there. And after all, for a prolonged trial, you've got a lot of jurors who are forced together with a bunch of strangers they may or may not like. At this point in the game, they're getting pretty annoyed with each other. Tensions are flaring. It doesn't really surprise me that much in a case like this.
So the woman accusing him of the last charge also testified against him in 2020. This is someone who engaged in a consensual relationship with Weinstein. So how difficult does that make it for the jury, especially when they have to reach a unanimous verdict?
Frequently in sexual assault cases, it is one person's testimony against, in theory, the defendant, but the defendant rarely takes the stand. So credibility is a huge factor in sexual assault cases. There's usually nobody else around who saw it. You don't have any video. You don't have any other kind of digital or scientific evidence for the most part, at least in these cases. So credibility becomes everything. And sometimes even victims who are telling the truth, for whatever reason, the jury decides that they are not credible. And that is the province of the jury. Our system gives them almost blanket power to decide issues of credibility.
As Chloe laid out, this, of course, comes after that appeals court had overturned the 2020 conviction. What could be next here? What is the path forward for Weinstein with all these potential outcomes?
This case is technically not over yet, but assuming that this ends with the conviction that is already on the books in this case, Weinstein will probably go back to California to start serving his California sentence. Once that's over, then he has to come back, at least for sentencing purposes, and serve his New York sentence. But this case, of course, not exactly over yet.
All right. Danny Ceballos, thank you so much.
Weather time. Let's take a look outside here in New York. A beautiful and hot day expected here. Very different from down south, where flood watches remain for millions from Texas into Louisiana and Arkansas. So let's check in with meteorologist Angie Lastman.
Wow, look at that, Angie. A shot with no rain this morning. Hi.
Yeah, wait till I tell you about the weekend forecast in the Northeast. I'm sure you guys will be thrilled. First, though, we've got to talk about what's happening across parts of the South. Busy morning, active morning. We've got flood concerns across much of Texas, stretching across really a good chunk of this region. And it's no surprise, really. We've got some heavy rain. We've got a whole lot of lightning. Again, it's going to be a busy morning. The commute's going to be difficult across this region. And we've still got more concerns as the day goes on. 21 million people, though, in the meantime, under these alerts. They stretch into parts of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. So really the Shreveport metro area, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, all dealing with the flooding concerns this morning. Some flash flood warnings are in effect in those locations. And we're going to keep it busy really across much of the east as we go through the next couple of days. So let's just look at the pattern, big picture. We've got still the showers and thunderstorms across that same region I was just showing you. Stretching out to the southeast, we'll have kind of still some unsettled weather and essentially heavy rain focused across the Midwest. Specifically, central Minnesota will get a good dose of rain today, and it keeps kind of an unsettled pattern across many of those spots for tomorrow, too. You can see a big picture look east of the Mississippi. We'll still see the potential for flooding across the south. We've got the scattered storms from the Midwest all the way to the East Coast. And here's a look at Saturday. That rain returns to the Northeast just in time for your weekend plans. We'll see New England get some of that action as well. And then stretching down through the Southeast and the Midwest, we've got new storms. So biggest concern today is going to be the flooding. And as I said, already ongoing across parts of the metro areas in eastern Texas, Houston, Bay City, those are under moderate risk. So those are the spots that we're really going to be concerned about here as the day goes on. But notice anywhere from 2 to 3 up to 4 inches of rain possible here as we get through Sunday in that region, and still a good amount across parts of the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast too through the weekend. So rain in the forecast for a lot of folks, but also some warm temperatures. Today is the warmest day that we've seen in quite some time. We finally hit the 90s in Philadelphia, New York. The average date of your first 90, May 28th. We have waited until today to see 90 degrees in New York City. And that's kind of the general trend up and down parts of the Northeast, guys. Unfortunately, this doesn't last into the weekend. If you're looking for some warm weather, you're going to have to go out to the Southwest, where we'll keep the pool day kind of forecast in place for a little while longer.
Well, there's much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, church controversy. One of the nation's largest religious groups voting against same-sex marriage and in vitro fertilization. But at first, after the break, the Middle East on edge. Israel considering military action against Iran. How the move may impact a potential nuclear deal. We'll be right back. We are back with the latest in the Middle East, where sources tell NBC News Israel is considering taking military action against Iran in the coming days. According to 5 people with knowledge of the situation, this action would most likely be without military support from the U.S. as President Trump works to advance talks with Tehran over a nuclear deal. Israel has become more serious about a unilateral strike on Iran as the U.S. and Iran get closer to a framework agreement that includes provisions on uranium enrichment, which Israel opposes. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us from Tel Aviv with more on this. Matt, good morning. What more do we know about this possible action at this time?
Yeah, well, we don't know very much. And in fact, we would know very little even about it at all if it weren't for the fact that the U.S. State Department was already taking actions to remove some of its non-essential personnel and family members from embassies like the ones in Baghdad and elsewhere in the Middle East, protecting them from some sort of retaliation. Now, whether or not this goes through, this could really scuttle those negotiations that are set to resume on Sunday to try to arrive at some sort of deal to restrain Iran's nuclear program. And we already heard from the Iranians in response. They said that the enemy must consider its actions and avoid making any mistakes. Ominous words as we get nearer and nearer to some sort of region-wide war, the kind of thing that has really been the sum of all fears ever since those October 7th attacks a year and a half ago.
Matt, if Israel were to take action against Iran, it would be a pretty major break with the Trump administration, which has argued against a move like this. How has the U.S. responded to this now as a possibility, and where do negotiations on a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran stand?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the big thing that we're seeing right now is the U.S. withdrawing some diplomats from diplomatic installations throughout the region. I spoke with a representative of the embassies here in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, and he told me that, they haven't actually done anything here to change their situation in terms of personnel. But the fact is, President Trump has long been warning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel not to take unilateral action. 2 weeks ago, he told the Prime Minister, don't do this because it's not the appropriate time. We can assume that there's something going on in the background trying to dissuade them from taking this unilateral action that they've threatened. But the fact is that the next round of negotiations are on Sunday. We don't know whether or not Israel will decide to attack before then, or wait, or not attack at all.
Matt, also in other news out of Israel, we just spoke yesterday about this vote to dissolve the Israeli parliament. This motion was brought by key coalition partners who threatened to bring down Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, specifically over its failure to pass a law exempting ultra-Orthodox Jews from military service. What was the result of the vote?
Yeah, well, that bill was shot down. I mean, this is at least buys Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition maybe a week of time. Now, this was something that was, really right up to the wire. There had been these negotiations trying to stop this bill from going through. Turns out those negotiations were successful because those ultra-Orthodox or Haredi parties, as you mentioned, the ones who are trying to keep their young men from being drafted into the military, like just about every other young Israeli man or woman is obliged to do by law, they came to some sort of concession, some sort of deal that hasn't been specified in the Israeli media that prevented them from voting for this bill. So for now, it looks as though Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government is safe, but it's all very destabilizing.
All right, Matt Bradley covering a lot for us this morning. Thank you so much. Well, coming up, life-saving heroics caught on camera. A worker dives into action after hearing a boy's cries for help. We'll show you what happened next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. In an overwhelming majority, Southern Baptists have voted to endorse a ban on same-sex marriage. And now the nation's largest Protestant group is also calling for restrictions on in vitro fertilization and also even sports betting. NBC News correspondent Priya Shrithar has more.
The massive Southern Baptist Convention, the annual meeting of the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S., wading into America's culture wars. The 10,000 voters in attendance adopting resolutions calling on congregants and secular politicians alike to ban things like gay marriage, transgender acceptance, IVF, and pornography, even tackling the topic of sports gambling, hoping to limit it.
We do want to use our size and our influence to remind lawmakers of who we believe they're accountable to. It's not just that they're accountable to Southern Baptists as the denomination. We think that they're accountable to God's laws.
These demands come at a time when, in many ways, Southern Baptists are at the zenith of their political power, with the nation's third highest ranking politician, House Speaker Mike Johnson, an outspoken member of the movement.
You humble yourself before the Lord every day.
Almost 13 million people identify as Southern Baptists, according to the Baptist Press, a number that has been decreasing in recent years, but still a vital and influential voting bloc with all three branches of the federal government controlled by conservatives.
These truths are not just truths for Southern Baptists. They're not just truths for Christians. These are truths that are foundational for societies to flourish.
Andrew Walker is the author of a resolution adopted this week titled On Restoring Moral Clarity Through God's Design for Gender, Marriage, and the Family. The 1,000-word text calls for the overturning of the Supreme Court's decision that legalized gay marriage. It also pushes to end the normalization of what it calls transgender ideology, defund Planned Parenthood, and end IVF and surrogacy.
I've been watching the Southern Baptist Convention my whole life, and I have never seen such a crazy resolution as this, where it's like a stew.
Mark Wingfield grew up in the Southern Baptist Church and became a pastor before splitting off with other less conservative pastors.
It's not just that we believe this and we want to live by this, but we believe you need to live by this as well. And so this is a prescription outward.
And it diverges from most Americans' views, especially on gay marriage and IVF, with some polls showing 68% of Americans saying gay marriage should be valid and 70% saying access to IVF is a good thing. But Wingfield says what happens in the Southern Baptist Convention can be a cultural bellwether for the direction of the Republican Party.
It's an indicator of the mood of that segment of the electorate and of the citizenry.
And as young men drive a resurgence of religion and a shift towards right-wing cultural values, Andrew Walker sees an opportunity for the convention.
In a culture that I think is awash in constant change, constant flux, that as people are looking for stability, I do hope that they would look to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Whether more do might impact how much sway these votes have on the rest of the country. Priya Sridhar, NBC News.
Well, in South Florida, a 6-year-old boy is alive and safe this morning thanks to a bystander who saved him from drowning in a swimming pool. The entire heart-pounding incident was caught on camera. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has our story.
In an instant, playtime at this pool in Fort Lauderdale turning into a nightmarish race against time. Surveillance video shows this 6-year-old boy slipping from an inflatable raft and plunging into the deep end of a pool. Almost immediately, it's clear he's unable to swim or even keep his head above water. The boy's cousin, who later told first responders he doesn't know how to swim either, desperately trying to help him from the pool's edge. A total of 108 heart-pounding seconds pass, with the boy flailing and then underwater, before finally help arrives in the form of a stranger. Roque Ivan Ocampo says he was working on construction projects around the building when he was struck by cries for help, immediately jumping into the pool and grabbing hold of the child, dragging him out of the water with some help from the boy's cousin and beginning to administer CPR.
When you got there, this child was at the bottom of the pool?
Yeah, I was totally on the bottom. He doesn't move at all. That's why I thought maybe he's dead, because he wasn't moving.
The child's family ultimately rushing over and calling 911. Arriving officers then took charge and assumed life-saving efforts. The child clearly shaken, but breathing.
You're doing good, bud. Keep breathing, okay?
He was then taken to a local hospital for treatment.
I feel just really grateful to be able to help this kid, because, like I say, at the beginning, I thought he was dead because he wasn't moving, he wasn't breathing. So I said, I just thank God for that moment that he's perfectly fine.
Police say the boy is expected to make a full recovery and that Ocampo's quick thinking ultimately saved that child's life.
It takes a lot of bravery to do what he did. And I think that Oscar's outcome would have been a lot worse if hadn't he jumped in the pool, pulled him out, and done CPR right away. I mean, he helped tremendously. I don't think we thanked him enough that day.
The next day, Ocampo, after giving the gift of life, receiving this opportunity to reunite with the boy and his family.
I hugged him. I told him, "You're very strong, and I'm so proud of you." Wow. And it was so special, to be honest. A wonderful moment for me. It's the best gift I ever had.
Oh, my goodness, what an incredible man. Our thanks to Sam Brock for that report. Well, with summer just around the corner, the Red Cross warns people that you should never leave a child unattended near water and to not trust a child's life to another child. And they also advise teaching children to always ask for permission to go near water. Coming up, candid questions for the CEO of one of America's most iconic coffee chains.
Can you commit that Starbucks will not raise prices this year?
For this fiscal year, we're not moving on prices. What I can't commit to is where the future goes.
When we come back, more of the conversation, including his reaction to the ongoing trade war. You're watching Morning News Now. We're back now with a look at how one of America's most iconic brands is facing uncertainty in the wake of President Trump's tariffs. Starbucks is just one of many companies, both large and small, trying to keep up with higher prices due to the global trade war. Our fellow NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson spoke one-on-one with their new CEO, Brian Niccol, on his future plans for Starbucks as he looks to make sure business stays hot.
Competition for the crown of best Starbucks barista in the world heating up in Vegas this week. But these drinks' building blocks, the beans, caught up in the president's trade war. Nearly all raw coffee beans Americans drink come from overseas, from countries like Costa Rica, Indonesia, and Ethiopia, with those 10% tariffs in place already. So for companies like Starbucks, what happens in Washington can be critical.
If, in fact, this administration does put in place those more punishing tariffs, if they can't get to some of these trade deals, how does that affect your business in the longer term?
Yeah, look, I mean, we obviously need to be aware of where the tariff policy goes. For us, really the main product that we deal with on an import basis is green coffee, which frankly cannot be grown in the United States. Obviously, our team is in touch with the folks in D.C. to try and understand where the policy is going to move. The thing that's great about Starbucks is we're a global company. We're an iconic brand. We have the flexibility and scale to navigate wherever these policy changes go.
Do you, as the leader of that global company, have anxiety about what's happening back in Washington with the tariff uncertainty?
You know, I don't, because I'm genuinely excited about the opportunity for our company.
That's quite confident of you to say.
Yeah, well, look, I don't control that.
And Brian Niccol controls the world's biggest coffee company. The new CEO of Starbucks, on the job for only less than a year, and tasked with a turnaround, reimagining a company that so far has made less money this year than the year before. Its stock sinking before Niccol came on board, and now a climate of economic uncertainty. Other big brands like Chipotle and McDonald's seeing their slowest sales since the pandemic, and consumers worried about the price they pay for the things they want.
When it comes to prices, as you sit here today, can you commit that Starbucks will not raise prices this year?
Look, that was our commitment. For this fiscal year, we're not moving on prices. What I can't commit to is where the future goes. But what I definitely can commit to is we're going to give people a great experience so that what they get for what they pay, they feel like they got a great value.
Have you noticed in this current moment this drop-off in lower-income customers?
No. You know, actually what we've seen is pretty consistent behavior from all income cohorts, male, female. I think the thing that really resonates the most is getting the drink done accurately, on time, and then set them up for an occasion that they want to experience the brand.
Why is it, do you think, that Starbucks has seen, those 4 straight quarters of sales down? You're clearly not doing what you want to do from a sales perspective yet.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think, look, we veered away from, owning the idea of the third place, the coffee house experience, making sure that the customer was front and center.
So now, to encourage people to linger longer, Starbucks has already done things like reintroduce ceramic mugs and comfier seats, cut about a third of its menu to focus more on its core of coffee, and it's put in place a new requirement: people buy something to sit in the store or use its bathrooms.
One of the things that you've said is that you feel like you're on the right path, but you want to move faster.
Correct.
So what is that timeline? At what point, what month, what year do you feel like you will be where you want to be?
Well, look, one of the things I'm really optimistic about is the green apron service model, which is really this idea of technology, the algorithm behind the scenes to sequence orders, and then staffing the stores, deploying the stores correctly, following the coffee house routines that we want to follow. We should have that across all our company-owned stores in the United States and Canada by the end of summer.
And while Starbucks just this week is rolling out a new AI helper behind the counter to help baristas get answers to their questions quickly, Niccol still believes the foundation of his company is its people.
The humanity of this business makes us unique. Now, that's not to say we're not going to use AI. We're not going to be forward-thinking on technology, forward-thinking on automation, but it can't be at the expense of having that humanity or that human connection between a barista and a customer.
How do you think you'll use AI down the road?
Look, I think it's great ways in forecasting, supply chain, actually to help us in our roasting techniques, help us with farming.
But none of that is really customer-facing.
Yeah, no, what I just ran through is not customer-facing, but what I will tell you is, like, in the app and in the digital experience, we're definitely experimenting with how we use AI, to help you learn, new ways to experience new drinks.
Our thanks to Hallie Jackson for that conversation. Well, Nickel isn't ruling out the introduction of other new products in the future, as he says Starbucks could double the number of its stores, but did not mention a timeline on that just yet.
Coming up, some of the world's top golfers hitting the links.
That's right. The first day of the U.S. Open is just getting underway. We'll get a preview next on Morning News Now.
We're back now with a look at one of the nation's most prestigious golf tournaments, which gets underway at Oakmont Country Club in Western Pennsylvania today. The first round of the U.S. Open begins this morning with many of the world's best golfers now driving for a win at the third major championship of the year. Joining us now for more on this year's U.S. Open is Associated Press golf writer Doug Ferguson. Doug, good to have you with us. So the U.S. Open's considered one of the most challenging tournaments because they always pick a difficult course. What are the biggest storylines you're watching out for this year?
No matter what, Rory McIlroy and Scotty Scheffler have done this year, Joe, everybody is talking about one name, and that's Oakmont. They love it here. I mean, this is called the toughest test in golf, and they're taking it to what's known as the toughest course in America. It is a brute with just big rough and fast greens and loads of bunkering that don't get enough attention in the church pews, and they've had it here for this is the 10th time they've had it. There's a reason. It's really hard, and they love it. Not the players, but the USGA.
I bet the players secretly like it in some form or fashion, especially when they need the other guy to not do so well. So Scotty Scheffler, of course, fresh off of his win at the PGA Championship. So in many ways, he is seen as the favorite in this tournament. What do you think? Can he go back-to-back? Can he win his fourth major?
He is the betting favorite for a reason. I mean, not only did he win the PGA, Joe, he's won 3 of his last 4 by a combined 17 shots. It's starting to, as good as he is, he's starting to really separate by the way he wins, by the way he limits mistakes. He doesn't really seem to have a big weakness in his game. Stay out of jail for the week, which is helpful. This is his tournament, not necessarily to win, but it's going to be hard pressed to see him not do well.
Is he becoming like Tiger was in the early part of his career?
Doesn't look the same way. I mean, there's been a lot of comparisons with Tiger statistically because of the way he hits the ball, by the margins he wins by, etc. But it doesn't strike you as Tiger because there's nothing really exciting about Scotty except just for how good he plays. Tiger would hit some shots that were just unbelievable, that we can still think of 15 years later. Scotty just dominates you. I think more than anything, he's starting to remind us a little more like Jack Nicklaus was back 2 or 3 generations ago.
Not a bad comparison there. If it's not Scotty Scheffler, who are the people most likely to challenge him this time around?
I think you can't get past Bryson DeChambeau. I mean, not only is he the defending champion, but the other U.S. Open he won in 2020 was at Winged Foot, which has some similarities to Oakmont just in terms of the rough, how thick it is, and Bryson is just a big basher, a big brawny guy who can get through this stuff, and he loves the big stage, and this is a big stage.
No doubt. All right, so another golfer who's making noise at this year's tournament is a dentist from the Midwest. He is set to make his U.S. Open debut. What can you tell us about this story?
I think it's awesome. I mean, he goes from like root canal to the real root canal, which is what Oakmont can feel like sometimes. He used to caddy at Oakmont back in the day, played college golf for a little bit, got away from it, and was really interested, too, in the long drive stuff. So this is the greatest thing about the U.S. Open is that it's open to anybody. And Matt's obviously an amateur and a great player, pays his entry fee, goes through the first stage of qualifying, 36 holes qualifying, and he earned his way here. And it's a great story to leave his practice for a week in Indiana and compete against the best in the world. Is he going to win? Probably not. The experience is unbelievable. The fact that he caddied here is really cool, and he's certainly capable of teeing it up. I mean, there's a lot of great players who didn't qualify, and Matt did. And plus, he hit the opening tee shot today.
There you go. We could use a Cinderella story. So there you go. Doug Ferguson, great to have you with us. Enjoy the U.S. Open. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe.
It's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now. Don't go anywhere. The news continues right now. Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. We've got a lot of ground to cover on this Thursday, so let's get right to it. Breaking overnight, tragedy on takeoff. A London-bound Air India jet crashing near a major airport in the western Indian city of Ahmedabad just moments into the flight. We know that more than 200 people were on board. Our Tom Costello has more in just a moment. Back home, fear and panic spreading across the nation. Protests intensifying over President Trump's ongoing immigration raids. Downtown L.A. serving as their epicenter. Folks there now bracing for a 7th straight day of unrest. We're on the ground as Texas Governor Greg Abbott ramps up pressure on protesters across the Lone Star State. Also this morning, we do have some good news for your wallet. A new government report finds inflation actually holding somewhat steady, and price tags on some everyday essentials are dipping. But the question remains, will it last? We are going to break down the numbers. And later in the hour, we are remembering a musical giant, Brian Wilson, whose decades of sing-along hits and visionary recordings cemented his spot in America's and the world's hearts forever. Let's start with that breaking news out of India this morning. An Air India flight headed for London, carrying more than 200 passengers and crew, crashed shortly after takeoff from the airport in Ahmedabad. Emergency crews are now searching for survivors while investigators rush to find out what happened. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
Yeah, good morning. So this happened in western India, and this plane was just taking off, barely got off the ground when suddenly it went down and exploded in a fireball. The plane was fully loaded with fuel. Obviously, that adds to the immediate dangers on the ground when you've got a fireball erupting, and we know that the plane may well have been fully loaded. The question this morning, with one of the most reliable planes in the world, how did this happen? In the streets of Ahmedabad, India, a horrific crash this morning. An Air India 787-800 exploding in a fireball. Dark smoke billowing across the city. At the scene of the crash near the local airport, rubble, smoldering debris as first responders rushed to the scene, with victims brought to local hospitals. Air India Flight 171 had just taken off, headed to London Gatwick Airport. The airline says 242 people were on board, including 2 pilots and 10 crew members. Among those on board, passengers from India, the UK, Portugal, and Canada. Air India says the captain had 8,200 hours of flying experience, while the Boeing 787 Dreamliner has a stellar reputation. This, the first crash in the plane's history. While India has a troubled history of aviation safety, Air India's chairman has been trying to improve safety. This morning, setting up an emergency relief center as families search for their loved ones. Family and friends around the world waiting for any word. Boeing is out with a statement this morning saying that it is aware of the crash, it is gathering information, and it will work with Indian authorities. As for the investigation itself, Indian authorities will be in charge of that. It's possible that Boeing and the NTSB will be involved because this is a U.S.-built plane. The question is, where would the black boxes go? They could come to Washington at the NTSB lab, or they could go to London or Singapore. That's yet to be determined. The question right now was whether this plane, as it was taking off, had its flaps in fact deployed for takeoff, which would allow for takeoff, or were the flaps not deployed? That's going to be a critical question as we look at the video that's coming out of India. Back to you.
All right, Tom Costello, thank you.
Well, closer to home, a federal court hearing is set for today on whether the White House can deploy the National Guard and Marines to assist with immigration raids in Los Angeles. This comes after another day of protests in downtown L.A. against those raids. The city is now preparing for a 7th day of demonstrations. L.A.'s mayor and California's governor continue to say that support by federal troops is not needed. We're also continuing to see protests against immigration raids taking place in other cities around the country. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has the latest now from Los Angeles. Liz, good morning.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Savannah. Good morning to you. Yeah, protesters again took to the streets of L.A. last night. In fact, a full hour and a half before the curfew here went into effect. Police declared an unlawful assembly for protesters and demonstrators that had gathered pretty peacefully outside of City Hall here. We were there. We saw police in riot gear and on horseback charge into the crowd. And at one point, even hitting our team. They were almost hitting our team. They were chasing protesters. All of this is a sign that these protests are not letting up here or across the country.
This morning, protests are growing nationwide in opposition to President Trump's ongoing immigration raids. Overnight, demonstrations in Las Vegas, the police on the streets, authorities ordering the crowds home. and standoffs in Spokane, Washington, with quieter protests in some East Coast cities. But the most intense demonstrations still happening in a small section of downtown Los Angeles. Overnight, President Trump again defending his decision to call in the National Guard and Marines despite the objections of local officials.
We weren't there if we didn't bring in the National Guard and the Marines. You would probably have a city that was burning to the ground.
700 Marines are currently training at a military base 30 miles south of downtown L.A. The U.S. Central Command saying overnight they could start serving alongside National Guard troops within the next 48 hours. In that concentrated downtown Los Angeles area, chaos erupting again last night when police on horseback swept protesters off the streets an hour and a half before the 8 p.m. curfew.
This is a really chaotic scene right now.
We have our gas masks on now. That was very intense. Police have now pushed most of the protesters into this park. They are chanting, peaceful protest, peaceful protest.
Earlier in the day, this surveillance video capturing the moment Homeland Security agents boxed in the vehicle of a man they say was a violent rioter who punched a CBP officer. The agents drawing their weapons as they made an arrest. Witnesses say 2 children were inside the car. As ICE operations continue in Southern California, this video going viral, appearing to show a farm worker in Ventura County being chased through a field by agents, eventually getting caught. Brian Vasquez says a routine trip to the car wash with his dad and little brother ended with ICE agents detaining their father, who is undocumented. The acting ICE director condemning the protest last night, saying agents are doing their jobs.
All we're trying to do is our law enforcement mission, and we have to deal with this.
Now, the Trump administration is continuing to ramp up their immigration crackdown. They've released a flyer with a new hotline on it, urging members of the public to report anybody that they believe to be in the country illegally. And yes, as for that legal battle between Governor Gavin Newsom and the Trump administration over the federal government's deployment of National Guard and Marines troops here, that hearing is scheduled today at federal court in San Francisco. Guys.
All right, Liz, thank you so much. And as those protests in Los Angeles continue, demonstrations have also been happening in cities across the U.S. this week.
In Texas, police used pepper spray and flashbang grenades to disperse hundreds of protesters in front of the state's capitol in Austin on Monday. That incident prompted Texas Governor Greg Abbott to deploy the Texas National Guard across the state ahead of more planned protests. We have some economic news for you with new data out that shows that inflation across the U.S. is holding steady as consumer prices rose less than expected.
The latest consumer price index report out comes on the heels of trade talks between the U.S. and China, which are aimed at trying to diffuse the tensions between the world's 2 largest economies.
NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans is here in studio with us to break down these numbers. So let's start on this new data that we have this morning from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Prices rose 2.4% in the month of May. That's from the same month a year ago. What are the key takeaways here?
And from April to May, up only 0.1%, barely rising. And so that shows you inflation remaining cooler than many economists had feared here. And when you look inside the numbers, there's some categories that are really helping. Energy. For example, you had gas prices that are down 32, 33 cents compared with a year ago. So the typical shopper, you're filling up a midsize SUV, you're saving $6 or $7 this year. New and used car prices were flat or a little bit lower. And apparel prices, what's so fascinating about the apparel prices is that so many of these companies, retailers, just front load. They bought as much stuff as they could in January, February, March before the tariffs hit. And then in some cases, it didn't quite hit exactly the mark of what customers wanted. So now they're discounting those products to get to move them. So what I'm saying about May is that a lot of this stuff was brought in before tariffs, cars, clothing. And so now the summertime, that's when we'll look to see if prices start to rise.
At the heart of this, of course, is the trade talks between the U.S. and China. Talk about where we are with that. I mean, is it having much of an impact on prices right now? And what do we expect going forward?
So there was progress in this very tortured relationship between the United States and China, this very big trading relationship that had a handshake trade agreement in Geneva in May and then started to fall apart. So now they're back on track. The president's calling it a trade deal has been struck that needs to be signed by both countries' leaders. It's more like an agreement to keep talking because they have a lot of issues to work through. Export restrictions, tariff levels look like they're going to stay where they are right now. 55% tariffs on Chinese goods, 10% tariffs on U.S. goods going to China. That's still higher than we have ever seen in our lifetimes. That still will be a challenge for companies to figure out whether they eat those higher costs or pass them on to us, the consumers.
Let's talk interest rates. The way that Our friend Caleb Silver put it yesterday, he said there's basically a 0% chance that the Fed's going to lower them, but a 100% chance that the president will not be happy about that. Walk us through what we expect to see.
And I 100% agree with 100% of what Caleb Silver said yesterday. Look, all presidents want lower interest rates. When you lower interest rates, it gooses the economy. And you lower interest rates when the economy is weak, right? But the Fed is really being cautious here, worried about signs that there could be some slowing in the works of the American economy. And inflation at 2.4%, by the way, is still higher than the Fed would like to see it. It wants to see 2%. So inflation's still a little too hot for comfort, although cooling. And an economy that might be slowing with all of this uncertainty, huge uncertainty, from a complete remaking of the global trading order that the president is undergoing here. So the Fed meets in 2 days next week. I agree with Caleb. I think the Fed will stand pat for now. And I do think the president will say lower rates now, as he has been saying.
Christine, thank you. Great to see you.
Millions of Americans across the country who subscribe to the genetic testing company 23andMe, they're in a state of limbo this week as the company undergoes bankruptcy proceedings. While 23andMe says it is trying to find a buyer that can continue its work, many customers are now raising concerns about the future of their data. NBC News' Ryan Robles joins us now with details on this. Ryan, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. And if you're one of millions of Americans who got one of these kits, you expected that 23andMe made a promise that your DNA that you sent to them would be made safe and be private to anyone who would try and manipulate that data. Well, now that the company is going through bankruptcy proceedings, there are concerns that whomever buys the company will not be held to that same high standard.
For more than 15 million people across America like Daisy Burr, the company 23andMe offered the chance to open the secrets inside her DNA.
To learn more about my ancestry beyond just what family had shared.
23andMe unlocks answers about their customers' heritage and provides information on potential health risks. But it requires users provide their private and personal DNA. And as they work to climb out of bankruptcy through a massive sale, customers like Daisy are worried their DNA is being offered up to the highest bidder.
I didn't consent to them making money off of that. I believed they were making money off of just me paying for the kit.
Experts warn that DNA material could be used for a wide range of purposes. In addition to the access of personal information tied to a specific person, the material could be used by foreign adversaries to build biological weapons or track political enemies.
China could use DNA profiles to identify and track people of interest, such as American intelligence officers.
Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield argues 23andMe customers should have a say over who their data gets sold to. He and 27 attorneys general in 27 states and the District of Columbia are suing to force the approval of each customer before the sale goes through.
If you give your information over and through this bankruptcy process, this information is going to be sold to a third party, we want that third party to just give that frontline consumer consent.
23andMe believes the sale is permitted under the company's privacy policies and vows, quote, customers will continue to have the same rights and protections in the hands of the winning bidder. But on Capitol Hill, the company's interim CEO could not promise what would happen to all that precious data if the company were to be sold multiple times.
23andMe is doing everything we can to ensure that the next buyer adopts the policies and consents of 23andMe.
Your best intentions don't mean much, as far as I'm concerned.
And so it probably doesn't come as a surprise when news of the bankruptcy broke that millions of 23andMe customers rushed to the website to delete their data. That led to a big backlog. It was taking weeks, even months, for those customers to be given assurances that their data was gone. Well, the company said yesterday that they have rectified that backlog. If you go onto their website today and say you want your information deleted, it will be gone within the next 30 days. Joe?
All right, Ryan, thank you.
Well, now let's get to a frightening scene at a popular beach in Florida. A 9-year-old girl had to be airlifted to a hospital with serious injuries after she was bitten by a shark while swimming at a barrier island near Miami. NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra joins us now with the details. Hey, Marissa, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. I mean, it's just awful, right? She's just 9 years old. She's out of school, like so many kids that are just looking to spend their summer vacation with their family. She was swimming in those waters with her siblings, and instead of enjoying a nice day at the beach with her family, she instead ended up at the hospital with hours in surgery.
This morning, summer vacation off to a horrific start for 9-year-old shark victim Leah Lindell. She was snorkeling in the waters with her siblings in Boca Grande, Florida.
So it was a big shark, like 8 feet. I would say like 8 feet.
A local construction worker describes the girl's terrified screams from the beach, rushing to save her.
I was like thinking that they were playing around, but when they hear like they screaming like help, help, that's what we get after, and when we see the little girl crying, everybody was in shock.
Tourniquet is applied.
Copy.
The child was airlifted to a hospital in Tampa over 100 miles away. Her hand partly severed, but doctors performed emergency surgery. Her uncle telling NBC News in a statement overnight, the doctors were able to do some miracles and put her hand back together. The child's mother, Nadia, posting on Instagram, "Keep our family in your prayers."
You have to be careful, keep an eye out. How sad. That is very sad, and I feel so bad for the family and that poor child.
2024 data from the University of Florida says Florida's home to 50% of shark bites in the United States and 30% of all attacks worldwide. This as researchers say they are currently tracking the largest ever recorded great white shark, measuring over 14 feet long and weighing in at over 1,600 pounds. Last spotted 45 miles off the Florida-Georgia coast. Just one of a few recent shark incidents, including a dramatic Memorial Day sighting in Rhode Island.
There's a shark in the pond.
All of it coming as the summer beach season is just beginning.
Now, a witness there yesterday says that they think they saw and spotted a shark nearby just before this attack. They think it was a bull shark, but that's something that will be corroborated later when looking at the bite marks. But, Savannah, a couple things to keep in mind. If you are at the beach planning on enjoying these waters, keep in mind and keep an eye out if you see birds diving after one specific area. You see schools of fish, maybe fish jumping in one specific area, especially if they're tarpon. This beach that we saw this attack happen, there was a lot of tarpon in that area, and sharks are notorious for loving tarpon. This is mating season, so just if you see that around you, be extra vigilant. Savannah.
Marissa, really good tips there. Thank you so much.
Let's get a check now on your morning news now weather.
We have Angie Lastman here in studio with the forecast. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. A dangerous morning ongoing across parts of the South, specifically Texas, where we've got extremely heavy rain overnight and into this morning. Some spots picking up anywhere from 4 to 7 inches. We've got rainfall rates anywhere from 3 to 4 inches. So we're concerned about the flooding. It is ongoing. We've already seen reports of rescues happening, the high water rescues, and you can see multiple locations under flash flood warnings. The bigger area that you see in green is under a flood watch, but where we see these flash flood warnings, of course, not driving, if you can stay home in those locations, is going to be the best bet for you. We've got San Antonio right in the bullseye of one of those, Bay City as well, and just east of Houston. So we're going to watch this line of kind of really heavy rain and active thunderstorms work its way to the east as the morning goes on. And it's really slow moving, essentially. So that means more of this flooding likely to occur here as the rest of our morning and even afternoon goes on. Big picture look of what's happening. We'll see that elevated flood threat continue for Southeast Texas specifically and into portions of Louisiana. But this kind of secondary area of active weather is going to be centered across parts of the Midwest, specifically central Minnesota, where we will also see the potential for some heavy rain today. And then we keep it unsettled for tomorrow across much of the east, anywhere from the Midwest to the East Coast, stretching down to the Southeast. Really, tomorrow and Saturday, we'll have the potential to see some rainfall, some kind of cloudy conditions, maybe some showers, some thunderstorms. We've got all of that on tap and still the chance for some flooding. Today, the area we're most concerned about is that already active area. The place that you see Houston, Bay City in that brighter pink is a moderate risk. So that's where we're most concerned. But it's pretty expansive. It goes up to Little Rock, where we could see some flood concerns today. And of course, down towards the coast, New Orleans, Jackson, Springfield, all included in that, as well as Dallas. So we'll watch for the potential for multiple more inches of rain to come here by the time we get through the weekend, with that unsettled pattern staying with us. So anywhere 2 to 3 inches of rain possible for that region. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, temperatures are quite toasty today. We're expected to hit the 90s for the first time this year in a lot of locations. Philadelphia hitting 92 degrees today, most likely. We usually see that in mid to even late May, so it's been a little bit of a late start for these warmer temperatures. Washington, D.C. as well. Baltimore headed to the low 90s, and New York City 90 degrees. So we'll enjoy the summer-like temperatures for now because we do see a change with that. Not out west, though. Still going to be dealing with the pool weather and a whole lot of sunshine for our friends across the Southwest. It's triple digits for Phoenix. We hit 114 degrees on Sunday, and it'll be kind of a nice forecast to find any cool spot. Meanwhile, across the Northeast, it's the weekend. So, of course, that means that we've got some clouds, some showers around, and temperatures aren't all that nice. We're going to see kind of bright, sunny conditions today, guys. But then as we get through Saturday and Sunday in New York City, Washington, D.C., Philly, we'll see the rain return. And, and I'll be the bearer of bad news once more for the 8th weekend in a row.
Today, the Morning News Now team is heading to the Mets game.
And look at the weather I served up for you guys.
Beautiful weather for that. That's what matters.
Crazy I didn't get invited, though.
It's a little hot. Did you not? I didn't. It's okay.
You're invited now.
Now I am.
Sorry.
I feel like they have a conflict. You can have my ticket. Hilarious. We love you for that.
I love you.
You know what? We deserve it back.
Sunshine
for as much trouble
for your day.
Thank you, Angie.
You're like, I'm taking that away. Rain for you. All right.
The stage is set for closing arguments in the murder trial of Karen Reed, when we might hear from the jury next. We're back now with the latest on a closely watched retrial of Karen Reed, which could go to the jury by the end of the week.
NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has been following this trial for us. Joins us now with the very latest. Emily, good morning.
Hey, guys. Good morning to you. So prosecutors declining to call any rebuttal witnesses, which means the jury will be back in court tomorrow for closing arguments. Reed expressing optimism about the case as jurors prepare to decide her fate.
Karen Reed now gearing up for closing arguments in her murder retrial.
What can we expect to hear?
All the facts, all the truth, everything that went wrong with their case.
The final defense witness taking the stand Wednesday and clashing with prosecutors who allege Reed struck her police officer boyfriend John O'Keefe with her SUV.
Now that you've shared your opinions, can I get back to my question?
Sustained. The biomechanical engineer insisting O'Keefe's injuries don't suggest he was involved in a collision.
We have no information that he was even hit by the Lexus.
Using crash recreation videos to explain why he believes getting hit by the SUV would have caused more serious injuries like broken bones.
So even at 10 miles an hour, you're going to have 600 to 1,200 pounds of force acting on the arm.
Is that enough to break it?
That's enough. If you strike the elbow, that's more than enough to actually fracture the different bones of the elbow.
The prosecution contends Reed accelerated into O'Keefe with her car in reverse in a drunken argument and left him to die outside in winter, highlighting the cold with the falling temperature of O'Keefe's phone battery and playing the jury clips of angry voicemails Reed left that night. Now, with nearly 2 months of testimony to consider, witness credibility could play a key role in jury deliberations.
This case has turned into a classic, what we lawyers call a battle of the experts. And when this happens, often the jurors end up deciding the case based on which expert they found more compelling.
While Reed did not take the witness stand in her own defense, the 45-year-old has been vocal almost every day outside of court, even signaling "I love you" to a crowd of supporters.
You think your case is stronger this time?
I thought it was strong last year. It's stronger, yes.
Well, the jury has today off. The prosecution and defense teams will be back in for what's called a charging conference, which establishes guidance for the jury. It's particularly important in this case, given some jurors in last year's mistrial have since come forward expressing confusion over their jury instructions. This case, so widely watched, now entering its final stretch, guys.
All right, Emily, we know you'll be watching it too. Thank you.
Thanks for being all over it. Well, for more on this, let's bring in Michael Coyne. He is the Dean of Massachusetts School of Law. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us, Dean. So let's start with that cross-examination of the defense's final witness. This is when things got heated. When that happens, what impact does it tend to have on jurors?
Well, that's the real question is which series of experts will the jury find persuasive and have that expertise that they're looking for to really help aid them in the understanding of the event. And this expert was very strong. You would expect him to be very strong. He's their closing witness, and he held up reasonably well on cross. Yes, there were some contentious moments by the prosecutor and the witness towards the end of that cross-examination, but the jury has to decide whether they found him evasive or whether they found him persuasive. And on the whole, I think they're going to credit his testimony. The question is, will they credit the prosecution's expert to a greater extent?
So closing arguments are expected today. What do you expect we're going to hear from both sides?
Well, I think the prosecution will focus on the basics, the basic lesson that we learned in middle school about drinking, driving, and deadly consequences. And they'll focus on the science, the cell phone, the medical science, the accident reconstruction, as well as the statements that she's made that they've introduced throughout the trial from her various interviews she's made. If she's convicted of any charges here, it'll likely be based on the science and her statements that have been quite compelling at times throughout the course of the prosecution's case.
One of the defense's main arguments has been that this was an incompetent police investigation altogether. How much of a difference could that factor make, and do you think that really sticks in the minds of jurors?
Absolutely. I mean, from the outset, the collection and preservation of evidence, the police investigation has been sloppy beyond belief. And that's a huge burden for the government to have to overcome here in persuading the jury that she's guilty of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. He's going to have to ask them in the closing argument to recognize that two things could be true. It could be an incredibly sloppy, unprofessional investigation by law enforcement, and she still could have committed the charges by drinking excessively and then driving on a night where there's a blizzard and colliding with him to cause his death.
So, Dean, as we just heard at the end of Emily's piece there, Reed says that she feels like her case is stronger this time around, as expected. She did not testify. I'm going to guess you might agree with most of the experts that was the right decision. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I absolutely think because she has made so many out-of-court statements at times outside the court, even yesterday, that putting her on the stand would have been a horrible choice because the cross-examination would have likely been quite brutal. There's a number of conflicting statements she's made. So I think that was perhaps one of the wisest choices she's made here, as well as the defense in general. They've really streamlined the presentation of their evidence in this case and presented much more to the point of what we would call a reasonable doubt defense. They're trying to poke holes. They've poked some holes in the government's case. And since the government has such a heavy burden here of proving the charges beyond a reasonable doubt, they're hoping and their expectation is that they've created enough of that doubt that the jury will return not guilty verdicts on all three charges.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Dean. We appreciate your time this morning.
Increased immigration crackdowns have pushed one Illinois family to make a life-altering decision to self-deport. After 27 years in the U.S., two undocumented parents and their American-born children are now preparing to leave the country, leaving behind their community, their school, and the only life they've ever known. Reporter Jorge de Santiago from our Chicago affiliate, NBC5, has their story.
For this Waukegan mother, it's not a decision, it's survival.
We have to disrupt everything and go back with probably just clothing.
The family asked not to be shown on camera, but allowed us to record their voices. Her two children, both U.S. citizens, will soon say goodbye to their school, their friends, and the only home they have ever known.
I don't really want to go away. I don't really want to go away from this state.
She says they have lived with fear for years as an undocumented person in the U.S. of being pulled over, of ICE knocking on their door. But now with fewer job opportunities without legal status, the fear has turned into a plan.
I have to think of my kids. My kids are my priority.
That means getting passports for the children, a process that should be simple. Instead of visiting a government office, they have turned to a nonprofit for help. Pastor Julie Contreras from United Giving Hope is guiding them.
We've created a system that we guide them through and a system to
file for everything, and we review all the documents.
The General Consulate of Mexico in Chicago says that people considering returning to Mexico with U.S. citizen children should have a series of documents ready.
Make sure that they receive the social benefits and that they're enrolled in the Mexican school system, is to have them with dual nationality before you go to Mexico.
The family hasn't chosen a city in Mexico yet, only that they'll go where housing is affordable and relatives can welcome them. But the decision is already reshaping their children's world.
And I have to worry about if they're going to separate us or not.
And our thanks to Jorge de Santiago for that report. Coming now is Angie Martosio. She's a senior writer at Rolling Stone to talk more about the legacy Brian Wilson leaves behind. Angie, good morning. Obviously, he has been deemed a musical genius for the decades of hits that he has written and produced. Help us understand, especially people who maybe aren't music experts, what was it about him, the way he wrote, the way he produced pieces and composed them, that just sets him apart from other legendary artists?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the greatest pop producers and arrangers of the 20th century. I would rank him as important as Gershwin. He had this ability for turning a 2-minute single into this tiny masterpiece. Songs that were deceptively simple that he wrote in his 20s. Don't Worry, Baby, and In My Room. He was writing those so young. He was a total genius.
And he was no stranger, of course, also to darkness in his personal life. He was considered a tortured genius. He battled drugs, of course, dealing with the abuse from his father, mental health issues, and, of course, there was also the legal challenges within the band. Despite all this, he's just revered so fondly by family, friends, his fans. What's the biggest lesson you think we can learn from Wilson?
Yeah, I think Brian taught us, especially back in that time, it wasn't as understood as it is today. This stuff plagued him his entire life. And I think the biggest lesson here is that he taught us that these things don't have to define you. You can overcome them. He pushed against these limits. He overcame them every day, just due to the tenacity of his spirit.
Let's talk about what was going on there in the 60s, because you have this sort of rivalry in the best sense of the word between the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and the way the Beatles inspired Brian Wilson, and he made Pet Sounds, and that helped inspire Sgt. Pepper. We're actually hearing from Paul McCartney this morning. He wrote a statement online saying, in part, "I loved him and was privileged to be around his bright, shining light for a little while. How we will continue without Brian Wilson, God only knows." And McCartney has said that God Only Knows is perhaps his favorite song ever. Take us back to that time and what was going on in that era of music.
I mean, you have to remember that pop songs were very conventional at the time, and you have the two greatest bands ever. It's this beautiful chain of influence and reaction where they're constantly trying to one-up each other. And as you said, in a very respectful and creative way. But it was just this beautiful time of innovation in the studio. Brian was putting everything from sleigh bells to barking dogs in his music, jugs for percussion, like literal water jugs. And these huge bands and iconic session musicians were there. It was this really iconic time that we are still constantly mythologizing decades later.
Pet Sounds, literally, Pet Sounds. So I have to ask you, Angie, what is your favorite song? Can you even pick just one from Brian Wilson?
Oh, it's so hard to pick. I mean, it has to be a Pet Sounds track. Every song is a classic. My personal favorite is I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Mm-hmm. It really speaks to the vulnerability and masterclass of his songwriting. You have someone saying, "Sometimes I feel very sad," over and over again in a song, which was so unusual for that time. And he just really, it's my personal favorite. It's really hard for me not to choke up every time I hear it.
Angie Martosio, thank you for joining us this morning and reflecting on the legacy of a legend.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Coming up, Shaq putting up more than points this morning. After the break, why the basketball icon is set to fork over some big-time bucks over a now bankrupt crypto exchange. That is next. Stay with us. We're back with a legal fight that could shake up the tech and entertainment worlds. Disney and Universal have teamed up to sue the AI image company Midjourney, claiming the platform is using iconic characters from Star Wars, The Simpsons, Shrek, and more without permission. It is the first big lawsuit of its kind from Hollywood, and it could set a major precedent for how AI and copyright law collide. We should note NBC Universal is the parent company of NBC News. Lance Ulanoff is joining us to break it all down. He is the editor-at-large for Tech Radar. Lance, always good to have you with us. So, this is bound to happen. Here it is, the first major lawsuit, copyright lawsuit from big studios against an AI company. Talk about what both sides have to prove here to win.
It's the first domain sides. They have to prove that they're really using their IP, their intellectual property, willy-nilly just putting it out there, taking pieces, taking, iconic characters from The Simpsons and Star Wars and the Mickey Mouse library and the Universal library and just using it however they want. And the weird thing is that if you were to look at all the output from Midjourney, you would say, absolutely, that's what they're doing. Look at those images. There's Luke Skywalker riding a bike in Manhattan. Well, obviously, they're using that character, except the way this system works, the way all of these systems works, it's about the training, right? It's what happened to actually get these AIs ready to produce these images. They were trained on millions of images from across the internet, generally publicly available, because guess what? All of these companies put their information, they put their iconic characters on YouTube and other platforms where it's easy to find. And then the system basically uses that to understand, how might I create this character? So there's a disconnect, right? There's a disconnect between the original image and the output. The question is that still copyright infringement? And I think this is just such an interesting question because we have gone well past the tipping point. All of these platforms are incredibly good at recreating these characters. I challenge you to tell the difference between something that was originally done by Disney or Universal and something that was output by Midjourney or any of the other AI platforms, because this is potentially a precedent-setting thing, because all of these platforms, from Copilot to ChatGPT to Gemini, they all can output content like this because they've all been trained on the corpus of the internet.
I want to jump on what you just said there, because both Disney and Universal have said that Midjourney ignored letters warning them about copyright infringement. But you just noted this is precedent-setting. What kind of precedent could this set?
Well, you'll see there are some platforms, when you ask it to create these characters, it says, I can't do that. But not many of them. A lot of them are willing to do it. Quite honestly, this morning, I asked Gemini to create a picture of Luke Skywalker riding through the Manhattan on a bike, and it just did it. It didn't stop. Copilot did the same. But there's two things that can happen here. One, they would have to pay a licensing fee every time one of these images is generated of one of their owned characters. That's number one. And two, it would make it so that if, all the stuff that's out there already, they could be charged against that. It could be so much money. But I think all of these platforms are probably going to take a step back and say, look, I think we have to put guardrails here and not let anyone just create these things until we understand what sort of, what we're prepared to get hit with. And by the way, I should say on Midjourney that not anyone can just hop on and create these images. You do have to be like a paying subscriber.
All right. Lance Ulanoff, good to have you with us as always. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Let's get to some other money headlines. Shaq is set to pay up a tall amount of cash after some legal trouble. CNBC's Angelica Peebles joins us with that and some other Wall Street headlines. Angelica, good morning.
Good morning. That's right. Shaquille O'Neal has agreed to pay nearly $2 million to settle claims that he misled investors by promoting the now bankrupt crypto exchange FTX. The former NBA superstar, who once urged fans to trust the platform, will settle the case without admitting wrongdoing. This marks one of the first high-profile settlements over FTX's collapse. Costco has new benefits for executive members that go into effect at the end of the month. The retail warehouse confirming to USA Today that stores will open at 9 a.m. exclusively for its upper-level members and stay open an extra hour on Saturdays for all members, closing at 7 p.m. Executive members will get a monthly $10 credit for orders of $150 placed through its same-day service or Instacart. Costco's executive membership costs $130 a year. And now you can have your cake and eat it too at Walmart. The retail giant telling USA Today that cake decorators are the highest paid hourly positions outside of managers, with an average pay of $19.25 an hour. Walmart says it decorates more than 150,000 cakes per week nationwide, and it sees a peak during graduation season.
That is a fascinating statistic. Who knew of all the jobs there? All right, and they've been busy the last few weeks.
And that's a lot of cake.
No kidding, Angelica, thank you so much. K-pop's biggest boy band is inching closer to its long-awaited return to the spotlight. All but one of the 7 band members of BTS now done with their mandatory military service, meaning the group could be back together before too long. NBC News correspondent George Solis has more.
Global sensation BTS, one step closer to the reunion fans have been clamoring for.
Y'all, they did it. They're back.
2 of the 7 members of the K-pop supergroup discharged from South Korea's mandatory 18th-month military service on Wednesday. Jimin and Jungkook saluting a cheering crowd, bowing to their adoring fans who fittingly call themselves the BTS Army. Some traveled from far and wide.
I'm in Portugal, and it's 20 hours in the flight. 20 hours for come here. For me, BTS is my angel.
The fanfare following Tuesday's melodious discharge of members RM and V. J-Hope and Jin finished their service last year, and when the 7th and final member, Min Yoongi or Suga, completes his assignment later this month. The runway for a reunion will be clear for takeoff.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
It's been 3 years since the group's last performance together. The announcement of a hiatus.
근 10년이라고 합시다.
Yeah, what?
Coming at the height of the group's superstardom. Their reach extending across the globe, taking K-pop Main Street in the U.S.
Just say hi to all these folks that came out to see
you. BTS has picked up 5 Grammy nominations and is the most streamed male group on Spotify with billions of listens.
Look who we are the dreamers.
Now with their military obligations behind them, the band members are ready for a dynamite return. Promising to prepare and show the fans an even better version of themselves. George Solis, NBC News.
Coming up, one unwelcome visitor is raising a few eyebrows up in Vermont. When we come back, it might look like a funny, furry moment caught on camera right outside one man's front door. But officials say bear sightings like this one, well, they're no joke. Stay with us. That's next. All right, we're going to end this hour with a frightening encounter in Vermont. A man opens his front door, and what was waiting on the other side might make you hesitate before opening your own door. Reporter Yunye Martinez from our NBC affiliate WPTZ has the story.
It's not exactly the kind of house guest you hope to find on your doorsteps. Wilson Ring of Stowe says this visitor showed up unannounced, but there's no missing this black bear.
I was reading the news on my iPad, and the alert went off on my phone, and I'd heard the door rattle a little bit, and so I looked at my phone, and there was a picture of the bear.
It happened early in the morning on June 7th. Ring says it might look like a funny moment caught on camera, but it was no joke.
It's fun to see the video, but when you saw that video, that's not a good thing. I doubt that it would try and hurt someone deliberately, but if it got in a house, for example, bears are strong animals, and who knows what they could do.
Turns out this wasn't the bear's first visit to the neighborhood. Just 3 days earlier on June 4th, cameras spotted what may have been the same bear, this time roaming around his backyard.
I can't swear it's the same bear, but at least 2 neighbors have reported bears in their cars. Is it the same one? I don't know, but this one has the same affinity for people, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Wildlife experts say sightings like this are becoming more common and potentially dangerous.
For most bears, they're going to try it again. And that's when you start seeing the behavior escalating. Like once they realize, oh, there's food inside a car, there's food inside a shed or inside a garage, and then the next time the bear is breaking through a window or breaking through the door.
And that's why Wilson Ring says he's not taking any chances.
Bears are strong animals, and who knows what they could do, even if they weren't being malicious about trying to hurt someone. So it's better that they stay out in the woods where they belong.
Ring encourages everyone to make sure they lock their doors. Wildlife experts recommend securing garbage, taking in bird feeders, and putting electric fencing around any outdoor chicken coops.
All right, sharks and bears. I think we've covered all the terrifying things this morning that you need to be aware of. Our thanks to Yunye Martinez for that story. That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but don't go anywhere. The news continues right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.